I am 86 years old, and I have lived every single day of my life carrying something I was never supposed to survive. My name is Samuel Hargrove. In the county records, there is only one line about me. Survivor of the Miller County farmhouse fire, 1958. A survivor, that is what they called me. People used that word like it meant I escaped something I had nothing to do with. But survival is not innocence. And before I die, my children deserve the truth I have carried alone for 67 years. Because I did not survive that fire. I started it, and I let another man die for it, and I watched it happen without stopping it. People always think a tragedy begins the moment something breaks, but that is never true. A tragedy begins long before that moment. It begins in silence. It begins in misunderstanding. It begins in the things people refuse to say out loud. Our farmhouse was already broken long before the fire. The walls were old, yes, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was the people inside them. My father barely spoke unless it was necessary. My mother moved through the house like she was trying not to disturb anything, even air. My sister Mary was the only warmth in that place, and she was too young to understand the weight of silence. And my brother Daniel was the center of everything I was not because he tried to be, but because everyone else decided he already was. He was trusted without question, praised without effort, loved without condition. Even when he made mistakes, they somehow became lessons. When I made mistakes, they became warnings. I told myself I didn't care, but that was the first lie I ever told myself, and it was the one that grew the most. It happened 2 nights before the fire. I couldn't sleep. The air in the house felt too still, like something was waiting for a decision. I walked toward the barn because I needed space. That is when I heard voices, my father and Daniel. I stopped immediately. I remember pressing myself against the wooden wall, trying not to breathe too loudly. My father's voice was low and sharp. "This cannot continue," Daniel responded after a pause. "Then tell him the truth." A long silence followed. Then my father said something I would never forget. "If he knows, everything falls apart." Everything. That word stayed in my chest like a stone. I didn't hear names. I didn't hear details. Only fragments, only tension, only something hidden. But my mind filled the blanks instantly. That is what fear does. It does not wait for truth. It builds its own. And I believed I was being erased. Elias Mercer worked for my father. He was quiet, not the kind of quiet people trust, the kind of quiet people fear. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it felt like he had been listening long before you arrived. 2 days after the barn conversation, I saw him speaking with my father near the fence. The conversation stopped when I got closer. Elias looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something that I didn't understand at the time. "Be careful with what you assume." My father told him to leave immediately, but it was already too late, because my mind had already chosen a direction, and once a mind chooses fear, it stops considering alternatives. The farmhouse always had oil lamps burning. My father believed darkness made men weak. That night, I wished I had never seen light at all. Everyone was asleep. The wind outside moved slowly through the fields. Even the house itself felt like it was holding its breath. I walked through the hallway. Each step sounded louder than it should have, like the house was listening. In the storage room, the smell of oil was overwhelming. Barrels lined the walls. Cloth stacked neatly, dry wood ready for winter. Everything was ordinary, Everything was dangerous. I stood there for a long time, longer than I admit. I told myself I was only going to force answers, to create pressure, to create truth. But fear is never honest about what it becomes. When I lifted the lantern, my hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The flame touched the floor. At first, nothing happened, just a small glow, almost harmless, almost reversible. Then the wood moved, then it responded, then it began to breathe. I remember stepping back. I remember thinking I could still stop it, and then I left. That is the moment I stopped being someone who could return by morning. The farmhouse was gone. Only ash remained, and Elias Mercer was alive, standing near the road, watching smoke rise, soot on his hands, burn marks on his sleeves, a matchbox in his pocket. It looked perfect, too perfect. The villagers didn't ask questions. They rarely do when a story feels complete. Elias kept repeating, I wasn't inside the house, but no one listens to confusion. They listen to certainty, and I gave them certainty. When they asked me what I saw, I said, I saw him running. It was the only sentence needed, and it was enough. 6 months later, Elias Mercer was executed. The sky was completely gray that morning. No wind, no sound, only waiting. I stood in the crowd because I believed I had to witness it, as if witnessing would turn truth into something softer. When they placed the rope around his neck, Elias spoke one final time. I did not start that fire. No one answered him. But he wasn't looking at them. He was looking at me, and he smiled, not forgiveness, not anger, just understanding, like he already knew I would never escape him. Then the platform dropped, and something inside me never came back up. After the fire, I became a story, the survivor, the strong son, the man who overcame tragedy. People praised me for things I never earned, and I accepted it because refusing it would require truth. I married, had children, lived a life that looked normal from the outside, but inside, I was still inside that burning house. Every night, I woke up smelling smoke that wasn't there. Every silence felt like accusation. Every kindness felt undeserved. My wife once asked why I sometimes cried in my sleep. I told her it was grief. Grief is acceptable. Guilt is not. 49 years later, the first letter arrived. No name, no return address, only one sentence. Elias Mercer did not start the fire. I did not sleep that night. Then another letter came. Then another, each one more detailed, each one more precise. One line said, You left before the house screamed twice. That sentence broke something in me, because I remembered, not fully, but enough. The final envelope contained a photograph, the burned farmhouse ruins, and me, standing in the background, still, watching. Not moving, not helping, just present. On the back was written, You never tried to save them. I sat with that photograph until morning, because there was nothing left to deny. A historian later confirmed what I had always avoided. Elias Mercer was not inside the house. He had been trying to warn my father about something unrelated, something lost in incomplete records. But one note survived. The son misunderstood everything he heard. The son, me. And that misunderstanding became a life sentence, not in court, in memory. I am writing this because silence has finally become heavier than fear, because I can no longer carry a man's death without naming him correctly. Because my children deserve a father made of truth, not myth. So here it is, without excuses, without distance, without escape. I started the fire. I let an innocent man die, and I lived 67 years pretending I did not. After that first letter, I stopped sleeping properly, not all at once. It faded slowly, like something inside me was being pulled awake in small pieces. At night, I would sit in the dark and try to remember details of that fire that I had never allowed myself to think about clearly. Not the flames, not the screams, but the moments before, the silence in the hallway, the weight of the lantern in my hand, the way my fingers trembled even before I made the decision. I told myself I was overthinking. But overthinking is just memory trying to become honest, and I was not ready for honesty, not yet. The second letter came 3 weeks later, no stamp that I recognized, no handwriting I could place, only a single page again. This time it said, "You didn't just leave, you waited." I remember dropping the letter onto the kitchen table because I didn't understand what that meant, but my hands understood first. They started shaking before my thoughts caught up. I sat down slowly, and for the first time in decades, I allowed myself to remember something I had buried deeper than the fire itself. I had not run immediately. I had stayed for a few seconds, maybe longer. I had watched it grow, watched it spread, watched the house change shape in real time, and then I left. That detail had never been part of my story, but it was part of my memory. That night I nearly told my wife. I sat beside her while she slept, and I opened my mouth more than once, but nothing came out, because confession is not a single moment, it is a collapse, and I was not ready to collapse. Instead, I stood up quietly and walked outside. The air was cold, too cold for memory. I stood there for almost an hour, just breathing, just trying to convince myself that the letters were wrong, that someone was playing with me, that the past had no new information to give. But the past does not need permission to return. It returns when it is ready, not when you are. The third letter arrived folded differently. Heavier paper. More careful handwriting. It contained something I was not prepared for. Your sister screamed your name before she died. I froze because I had never told anyone that I heard her. Not even in my own mind. I had always blurred it, turned it into noise, turned it into fire, turned it into nothing specific. But this letter made it specific. And memory obeyed. Suddenly I was back there again. Not 86. Not safe. Just 18. Standing in a hallway that was turning orange. And hearing Mary's voice. Not once, but multiple times. Calling for me. Calling my name like I was supposed to answer. But I didn't move. Because I thought moving would make it worse. I thought staying still would make it stop. It did not. I spent my entire life believing Elias was guilty. Because I needed him to be. But the truth is simpler. Elias was never part of my fear. He was just the shape my fear used. A man standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. A man who became convenience. That is all it takes for innocence to disappear. Convenience. Nothing more. And I gave the world permission to erase him. The realization did not come as a shock. It came as exhaustion. One morning, I woke up and did not immediately remember who I was. For a few seconds, I was just present. No identity, no history, no story. And in that silence, I saw everything clearly. Not as memory, but as structure. I did not misinterpret the barn conversation. I did not misunderstand Elias. I did not accidentally allow the fire. I constructed a version of reality that protected me from responsibility. And I lived inside it for 67 years. People think guilt gets lighter with time. It does not. It spreads. It changes shape. It becomes habits. It becomes sleep problems. It becomes silence at dinner tables. It becomes avoiding certain roads, certain words, certain anniversaries. Every year, on the same date, I would wake up before sunrise. I never told anyone why. But now I know. My body remembered what my mind refused to hold. The final envelope came without warnings. No delay. No build-up. Just arrival. Inside was one page. And one sentence. We found what you were afraid to remember. Nothing else. No explanation. No signature. But I did not need it. Because I already knew. There was nothing left to discover. Only confirmation. My hand is shaking now as I write this. Not from age. From clarity. Because clarity is heavier than confusion. Confusion lets you survive. Clarity does not. I can feel the end of this story approaching. Not as death, but as understanding. And I no longer have the strength to resist it. So I will say it plainly again. Not as confession, but as fact. I started the fire. I watched it grow. I left when I could have stayed. And I let an innocent man die because it was easier than telling the truth. If anyone reads this after I am gone, understand this. The most dangerous thing in a human life is not anger. It is the story anger tells when no one corrects it. I lived inside that story. And I mistook it for my life.